For those of you who don't remember that, that's fine. The subject this week is humor in a time of catastrophes, and you know which catastrophes I mean. We picked up more just since our last meeting, more catastrophes. But humor will have its place. In today's talk, especially puns, and we've been through that before about whether puns are the lowest form of humor or not, but you know, as Ezra used to say, one man's meat is another man's Persian. That was very helpful. It's interesting. Obviously there is humor in the Bible, especially in the Old Testament or Hebrew Bible or Tanakh. You use the term you like, but much less in the New Testament. Though strangely, maybe not so strangely, there are better jokes about the New Testament. I know I've told a couple of Jesus jokes in our meetings that I think are among my favorites. They were pretty good. And I don't really have any good Moses jokes that are as good as the Jesus jokes. And I don't think this is chance. I think it's precisely because the New Testament is an extremely serious book. I would say much more so than the Old Testament, that it lends itself to making jokes about it. But it's not, you know, the Apostle Paul just doesn't strike me as a guy I'd invite to a party because, you know, then he'll be a fun guy who will make the party full of laughs. Now, here's your first test, everybody. This is one I give my students as well. Think of the 5 best jokes you know, your favorites. I don't mean little ha-ha jokes. I mean double bent over pain, double thigh slapper jokes. Now, if you don't have all 5 in mind now, or if you even have any in mind, then when we're done, you turn this off, then you come up with your 5 best jokes. In every one of them, somebody is hurt, humiliated, or killed. Now that's interesting. Now you may be able to think of some exceptions to that. So I'll note the exceptions myself so you won't think that I'm insensitive to this kind of thing. As long as we all recognize that way disproportionately, jokes are about things that embarrass or humiliate us, or kill us, or hurt us. There are jokes, now you could say, though, about love, where nobody has to get hurt, humiliated, or killed, and jokes about sex, where that doesn't have to happen either. And there are a lot of jokes about God. And I know some jokes about God, some guy gets struck by lightning or something, but that doesn't have to happen in all of those jokes. So we have to refine the definition there. The best jokes, the jokes aren't just about where someone is hurt, humiliated, or killed, meaning pain, but they include love, sex, God. That is to say, humor is about things that scare. And if you don't think love is scary, then you haven't yet been in love. And if you don't think sex is scary, I'm sorry, you work on that. And if you don't think the concept of God is scary, then you've got some kind of unusual concept of God. And even if you have a concept of a completely loving, benevolent, sweet, kind God, that's if you really have a sense of what this is, an infinite being with all the power in the universe, if you don't find any element of fear in that, then you're luckier than I am. You must be living on Klonopin or something. So it seems to me the definition is something more like things that scare us. For example, I've been telling jokes and loving jokes, listening to jokes all my life, reading jokes. I don't know any jokes about peace. There are a lot of jokes about war. I remember Reader's Digest. Remember Reader's Digest? They used to have a section called Humor in Uniform that was all military jokes, you know? Soldier, did you shave today? No. No what? No blades. That was that kind of joke. But there are no jokes about peace. There are jokes about enemies. But I don't know any good jokes about friendship. Now, all of you are out there, and I really listen. So if any of you think of one, you know, send it to me or comment after or put it in the bottom there or send me an email or whatever. There is one real exception to this, a kind of humor where no one has to get hurt, humiliated, or killed, and we'll come to that later. So, as I say, it's about fear. Well, now do we understand why talking about humor in a time of fear is appropriate, given that the weeks we've been living in, especially the last couple, as if it wasn't bad enough, we do live in a time of fear. And that fear is one of our most essential experiences. In fact, it probably is our most common experience, that absolutely everybody at some time or another is afraid. And the master himself, Freud, said that he wrote, fear itself needs no introduction. Everyone has at some time or other known this sensation. More specifically, he says, he wrote, we all knew fear from the first moment we were born. The moment you come out of your mother, suddenly everything changes. This really cool place where you've been pleasant and had paradise for 8-9 months, suddenly there's a whole thing out there, and there's people and there's noises, and you have all the fears involved. You, until now, didn't have any issues of circulation or breathing. That was all taken care of for you through your umbilical, and then they cut it. And now you have to discover respiration and so on. Nearly all babies start breathing themselves. The doctor often does the helping them with the patting on the back, which is to help. It's not the way it's always pictured in the movies, that nothing happens until you hit the baby in the back. So that it all starts there. And remember who we're talking about here. This is Freud. And he does note this minor little point that that we all begin our lives in this fearful situation, and it is joined with the moment of separation from our mothers. Do you get it? Do you need to move to Vienna to get this point? And so he says that it's this experience that absolutely every one of us has had. Now, since it happens that my oldest friend in the world is an OBGYN, and his wife is a midwife. Now that's a match made in heaven. My son-in-law, Janet's son, also is married to a midwife. So we've got people in our family, with whom I can consult on these matters where I'm not expert myself. And they, especially on this matter of the separation from the mother, I thought about that. And thought about the modes of birth where you don't get separated so much from the mother. Like my daughter-in-law does that kind where the mother is in the tub and in water, and you deliver the baby that way. And as soon as the baby is delivered, they bring it immediately right up onto the mother's chest. So there is no separation from the mother. And sure enough, her experience is the babies who are born that way don't do all the immediate crying that most other babies do when they first come out. That's pretty good, as evidence goes. Well, it doesn't stop. It doesn't get any better. Life is fearful. We all know that. I mean, it's all outside there now. But even before these terrible things happened, your life is uncertain. Everything can be going great, and suddenly you have a disease, or somebody attacks you, or something bad happens, or whatever. There's no controlling. That we ourselves are not really in control of our lives, and it's scary. Now, if that's true, that that's the universal experience of humankind, all women, all men, all trans, then we can't live with that all the time. The only person who can live with it all the time is Woody Allen. But the rest of us who can't constantly focus on it, we have to somehow find a way to get through life. And so we need ways to manage it. And we humans have invented a lot of tools to help us deal with fear, so we don't have to walk around our lives all the time going, ooh, taste that. It's a good, yeah, but I'm scared. You can't live like that. And the two most extraordinary tools that we humans have invented to deal with our fear are, ready, tragedy, tragedy performed, and comedy. Tragedy, the idea is you watch a play, or it could be in a book, could be in a film, but classically it's in a play by Aeschylus, Sophocles, Euripides, and then later by Shakespeare. Nobody else has ever come quite close to those four. I'm going to express a few opinions here, and if you don't agree, that's okay. You're entitled to your opinion too. You're wrong, but okay. Anyway. But when the audience goes to a tragic play, you see a person who's not an average guy. The tragic hero or heroine is almost always a person of unusual gifts. If it's Oedipus, he's the wisest of men. Sometimes it's frequently a king. It's a ruler or a governor, somebody powerful, and yet they're going to lose in the end. And the idea of a tragic play is, it's not just that it's sad. There are a lot of plays that are sad, but that's pathos. They are pathetic. They are not tragic. And when people say stuff, the tragic death of so-and-so in the newspaper, in a certain profound sense, I suppose you could say all deaths are tragic, but really in the real definitional sense of what we mean by tragedy classically, they aren't. The point of a tragic play is that not that the tragic hero loses, that he dies or gets exiled in the end. It's that he must die or get exiled in the end. You don't go to see Hamlet and think, wait, maybe this time at the end, he'll win the duel, he'll kill his uncle, he'll get his mother to say she's sorry, and Ophelia won't have drowned after all, and they'll get married and rule Denmark, and it'll be great. Or you don't go to Oedipus thinking it'll turn out, oh, that wasn't his father on the road. There was some other guy that he killed. And that woman he's married to, that's just an actress posing as his mother. No. The point of a tragedy is that the hero must end up that way, and that everything in it is constructed to make it happen. And no matter what anybody in the play does, whether it's Oedipus's parents or Oedipus himself or Oedipus's wife, well, that's his parents, no matter what they do to prevent that from happening, you all know that it has to happen. And eventually it reaches a point where he too realizes that it has to happen. Where Macbeth keeps thinking all along he can beat the system, he says, because no man of woman born can beat Macbeth, and then Macduff says, I was untimely ripped from my mother's womb. He was a C-section, so he wasn't a woman born. And now Macbeth knows that everything he thought was going to work is not going to work. And then he says, lay on, Macduff. He knows that this is it. And he still says, okay, it's like, so come at me, Oren Ishii, give me everything you've got, If you get tired of my allusions to contemporary or past film, you write to me and I'll change that. So that's what tragedy does. You go in and you see this terrible thing where somebody like that, you say, well, if that person is going to lose, what chance does a person like me have? And despite the pain that you feel, because you have catharsis, you feel along with the hero or heroine, you then walk out of the theater, the lights come up, and you go, oh, I'm okay. And by intensifying your fear for a while, and then facing it and letting it out, it's a relief, and that's a mechanism we do. We modern Americans have a different thing, since we're not good at writing tragedy. The only one that comes close, people always say, is Death of the Salesman. I'm sorry, nothing against Arthur Miller or his wife. It just seemed to me that Death of the Salesman just isn't Oedipus or Hamlet for me. I'm sorry, with all apologies. But what we Americans do now, and much of Europe is we go to movies that are always more and more intensely terrifying, with monsters and people cutting up people with machines and with people sneaking up behind teenagers in the high school gym, and all things keep happening that are terrifying. And you live through that fear, and then the movie's over and the lights come up and you come out, and it works like a tragedy, that it's a relief from the fear. And the same thing with when we do, roller coasters and ever scarier rides. The same thing, that's the purpose of doing them. Of course, I only hear that because I personally won't get on any of those because I am a chicken. Okay, so we've covered that. But for all of you who've done it, you know what I'm talking about. There's that moment and you scream and you and then you get off and then life's okay. So that is tragedy as a mechanism of dealing with our fear, and it works. It provides relief. And the other main thing we humans have invented to deal with fear is comedy. And I've already told you the key to that. I've said, the jokes are disproportionately about things that scare us. And what you do in a joke is, for a moment or two, you pretend that they don't scare you. That's what a joke is, right? In a joke, somebody gets hurt in a way that you don't really want to get hurt to yourself or happen to anybody you care about or even a stranger. But it happens, and then but then you realize it's just a joke, and then we all laugh. And that is that same feeling. It's a different mechanism of relief from the pain. Now, everything I've just been saying may start to sound to you like pop psychology. And I have nothing but disdain for pop psychology. So before we descend into that insulting, demeaning genre, let me be clear that I raised all of this, not as a pop psychology thing, but as an introduction to one of our best available sources of humor for dealing with pain, the Hebrew Bible. And that's something I do know about. Interestingly, the two best cases of humor in the Hebrew Bible, in my judgment, are the books of Jonah and Joel. And Jonah and Joel, as it happens, are both books about catastrophic threats to life. Get it? So let's talk about Jonah and Joel. The book of Jonah is seen by many scholars, so it's not just me, as having been written as satire on prophecy. They see it as humor, as comic. Some say parody, some say satire. I find that a very subtle distinction that I don't quite get. For those of you who aren't positive, let's review the story very quickly. Jonah is an Israelite. God tells him to go to Nineveh, which is the capital of the Assyrian Empire. It's like the middle of what is today Iraq. And he tells him to go there and speak out because the cry of Nineveh has come up to God, and they have great evil there. And Jonah, hearing this, does naturally what, of course, any one of us would have done. He goes down to Jaffa, which is like just north of what is today Tel Aviv, and he gets on a ship heading west across the Mediterranean Sea. Now, do we need a map to get this straight? God is sending him to, now, I don't know, you're facing me, and so I don't know what's left or right or east or west here, but God is sending him west. Good. If there's a map behind me, that's west, to go to Nineveh from Israel. And he goes east across the Mediterranean Sea. It says he's going to Tarshish. We're not sure what Tarshish is. Some think it's Sardinia. Some think it's the best answer, most common, is that it's Gibraltar, meaning the farthest we knew, in the opposite direction from Nineveh at the time. And he's supposed to go over land. He goes over sea. So obviously, he's trying to get out of delivering the prophetic message. But as you know, you can't run away from God. So God makes a storm at the sea, and the sailors are all praying to their gods. Nothing's working. And they say to him, what are you doing? And he identifies himself as this Hebrew, and that he worships. He says, Yahweh, the God who made the heavens and the earth and the lands and the seas. So now he understands that there isn't someplace we can go and get away from this God. And they say, what should you do? And he says, throw me in the sea and it'll get calm again. And the sailors are good guys. They really try to row and prevent that from happening, but it doesn't work. So they give in. So they offer sacrifices and make vows to try to get God to understand, look, don't blame this shedding of innocent blood on us. And they throw him into the water, and a fish comes and swallows him, and then the sea is calm. And Jonah does what any of us would do if we were swallowed by a giant fish. He writes poetry, and inside the fish, he writes this psalm, which never has anything to do with fish. And and then the fish vomits him up on the shore. And so now he realized he tried to get away, going the other direction, but it didn't work. So he's back on the shore. So now, okay, I get it, it's God. So he goes to Nineveh. And you can understand why he was afraid to do this. Remember, he's an Israelite, and he's being told to go to the capital of the Assyrian Empire, to Nineveh, and preach against them that they're bad. You can understand that you wouldn't jump for the chance at this particular job. That is like if God would tell a modern day Israeli to go to the streets of Baghdad and preach that they're bad and God is going to destroy them. You get it? So now he goes to Nineveh and he starts marching through Nineveh and he says 40 more days and Nineveh will be overturned. And the people all listen to him. And you go, what, the first religious people in the Bible are the Assyrians? And Israelites never listen to their prophets. But of course, that may be the comic point of the book. And so the Assyrians all listen, and they all wear sackcloth and ashes, and they're atoning. And even the king gets off his throne, and he puts on sackcloth and ashes. And it says they even put sackcloth and ashes on all the cows in Nineveh. I'm not making this up. This is in the Bible, you know. And then, so God doesn't destroy them. And God and Jonah is sitting outside Nineveh in the last chapter, and he's looking, nothing much is happening, and he's very upset. And God says, are you right to be upset? And Jonah says, yeah, upset enough to die. He says, because I knew you would do this. You always do this. You're always long forbearing, abundant in kindness, and forgiving of evil. Now, that is the passage in Exodus 34, where Moses has this encounter with God, the most intense encounter where a human being actually sees God. And God describes himself as merciful and gracious God, long forbearing, abundant, El Rahum Hanun Er Chapayim Rachesed Yemet, long forbearing, abundant in kindness, bearing sin and crime and transgression. And then again says, though not cleansing, completely visiting the sins of the parents down to the fourth generation. And Jonah quotes that passage, except he leaves off the part about though not cleansing and visiting the sins of the fourth generation. He leaves out the word not. So he says, you're forgiving, I got compassion and all that, and cleansing. And changes it to, and forgiving of evil. And by the way, those of you who know your Jewish prayer book, in the Siddur, the Jewish prayer book, they do the same thing. They cut off the bad part at the end and only talk about the compassionate, forgiving, merciful part. Jews. So then God says to Jonah, are you right to be angry? And Jonah says, yeah, right enough to die. And God says, look, I did this thing, I made you hot with the hot wind, and then I had this gourd grew over you, and you were happy about the gourd, but then I had this worm destroy the gourd, and now you're hot again and you're unhappy again. You cared, he said, about this gourd. You didn't plant it, you didn't raise it, and you cared about a gourd. Shouldn't I care about a city with more than 120,000 human beings who don't know right from left? And many cows? And that's the last words of the book of Jonah. And many cows. You got to care about those cows. Now, I think there's humor there. The fish thing, the cows thing, the deliberately misquoting God's words on that passage, by the way, is quoted by several prophets and Psalms. It is the most quoted verse of the Bible in the Bible itself. God says it to Moses, and then it is repeated and quoted in various other places in the Bible more than any other verse in the Bible. And that's the one that he messes with. And I go, yeah, that's funny. And putting the sackcloth on the cows, you know, I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. Now, in fairness, I will say, as somebody who's studied humor for much of my professional life, I know that we can't know for sure what was humorous to another culture. We don't necessarily, I mean, Israelis and Americans, when they tell jokes to each other, they tell a different kind of jokes. And half the time, an American tells a joke to an Israeli that we Americans think is just so funny, and the Israelis go, oh, c'est masrique. Is that funny? and the same when they tell theirs, and we don't. So I admit that's true. It's hard to get jokes from another culture. We used to tell a lot of jokes that were put down jokes of other cultures. We told blonde jokes, we told Polish jokes, Jewish jokes. You do, and our present time, I can tell you because my daughter is pursuing a career in comedy, you just don't do that anymore. And the fact that the comedians can't do it as much on the stage, that's okay with me, and chances are we shouldn't either. So no, I won't tell blonde jokes anymore because they're dumb. And the Polish jokes that they used to tell in the 60s, everybody told them, weren't aware that this was kind of like deeply offensive to Poles, always hearing jokes about how they're dumb and all. And yes, you don't tell blonde jokes, like for instance, one blonde says to the other blonde, which is farther, the moon or Florida? And the other one says, duh, you can see the moon. Now, as I'm saying, I introduced that by saying this is an offensive joke, and I want you to understand that I don't approve of the joke. And I won't ever tell it just if I'm sitting around with people as a joke. I'm telling it to demonstrative. But my question is, 1,000 years from now, and somebody's studying American culture, and they read that joke, will they get the joke? They'd have to know what that context was. And you can apply that to any of the other kinds of jokes either. Wouldn't it be wonderful if they wouldn't get any of the anti-Jewish jokes because anti-Semitism is dead and buried by them? I mean, so there is this notion that you can't know what's humorous to another culture. Despite all that, and having said all that, I'm still persuaded that what's going on in Jonah was humorous in their culture, and it's humorous in ours. But I know that there are scholars in my field who don't agree with that, so I'm telling you, you can read them. Now, the element of paranomasia, punning, is a kind of humor, though not all puns have to be humorous. In Julius Caesar's, when Mark Antony makes the funeral oration over Julius Caesar, he says, justice hath fled to brutish beasts. Okay, he's speaking right after Brutus did. And he's putting down Brutus, and he says, justice hath fled to brutish beasts. Now, the actors who perform that don't have to go, do you get it, everybody? Brutus, did you see? It's like Brutus over there. And the pun is there, but it isn't necessarily funny, or it could be taken as funny. So puns can serve various purposes. But puns are the exception to that rule that I mentioned earlier. In a pun, nobody has to get hurt, humiliated, or killed, and it can still be a good pun. When I said at the beginning today, one man's meat is another man's Persian, nobody got hurt. Nothing against, some of my best friends are Medes. I mean, yeah, it's not that. But precisely for that point, what is the proper reaction by humans to a pun? When someone tells a pun, you go, oh. You imitate being in pain. And a good pun is called a groaner. Precisely for that. So, and anyway, identifying paranomasia is more than just finding humor or even artistry. It's another tool that we in the Bible field have for our work. So, for example, I told Dan about one that he likes before, from the story of Joseph in the Bible, right? His name is Yosef, and it says his brothers got angry at him, and then they got angrier. They added to get angry, which is they Yosefu, to get angry. And his name is Yosef. You get it? And twice he tells them his jokes, and it's who Yisaper. Those of you who don't know Hebrew, you can still get the basics of this. It says Yisaper, which contains the letters of the name Yosef. And that's repeated twice. And then finally, my favorite is he wears this coat, the katonet pasim, and everybody says, what is a katonet pasim? A coat of many colors. And some people say, no, it's a long sleeve tunic, it's a polka dot coat, it's a pink coat, it's a striped coat. No, the thing about the coat is that it's pasim, which is the name Yosef backwards. Now you might say, oh, come on, that's pushing it a little too much that they do it backwards. Except in that same thing, there's a bunch of other puns. For example, that it keeps punning on the word shalom. His father sends him to go check the shalom of his brothers and the shalom of the flock. And the brothers are so angry at him, it says that they can't bid him shalom. And when he walks up, they say, are you going to rule over us? Which is, will you team Shol? And Mashol is shalom backwards. Now, if those two examples within the same page don't persuade you, don't worry, you'll get plenty in the book of Jonah. In the Balaam story, it says his ass can't get through this narrow place. And the narrow place is called Ben-Mishol, which is a word that contains all the letters of the name Balaam in the word Mishol. And my favorite, my student, Tyler Kelly, who's brilliant, he pointed out in the curse on the house of Eli, in the book of Samuel, it says that someday his descendants won't be able to take care of themselves. They'll need to go from door to door and seek help. And they will sifacheni. Now that's interesting, sifacheni, because his sons' names are Pinchas and Hophni. And the Hebrew word sifacheni contains all the letters of both Pinchas and Hophni. These people liked their puns. And now we come to the book of Jonah. Jonah in Hebrew is Yonah, and he's sent to the city of Nineveh. And the name Nineveh is spelled with all the same letters as the name Jonah, Yonah. That's like if you had sent Friedman to Friedlandia, or I mean, no, that wouldn't even be as good. I can't even make one as good as that. It's brilliant. Now, we could just see this as a fortuitous coincidence about the name Yonah in Nineveh. So yes, I admit, it may not have been done on purpose. It may have just been done for the hell of it. Okay, but I could keep going with that. I could say, okay, but I have to clam up and I won't be a crab and I'll stop carping. And I know this sounds fishy and I know it's sharking to you. Whale. So once you get into the fish puns, you're dead because, But the book of Jonah, the reason I know that Yonah Nineveh isn't just a chance kind of thing is that the book has more intense concentration of puns than any other section of the Bible. The book of Jonah has about 35 plays on words, I count. And it's 3.5 pages long, so that's 10 per page. That's unusual. Interestingly, for example, it keeps telling how Jonah has to go down. He goes down to Jaffa, and then he goes down to a ship, and then he goes down inside the ship, and then he lies down and goes to sleep. And the word for to go to sleep there, so those of you who know Hebrew, to go down is yarad. So he yarad to the place, he went out to the ship, and yarad inside the ship, and then it says he falls asleep. And they come to which is vayeradem, which is not the usual word for to fall asleep, but it contains the word yarad, to go down. And it works even as a pun in English, because in English we say we fall asleep, we drop off. So what do you know? It even works in English. Usually puns don't translate. Should I explain that? But puns don't translate. It's a famous thing about puns. My favorite case is in Abe and Carmen, are you there? My friends here, they have a dog whose name is Annie Hall. And there's, in the movie Annie Hall, there's this scene where Woody is walking along with his friend and he's having this Jewish paranoia because he had said to his friend, did you go? And the guy said, no, Jew. And he goes on about that. Now, I always thought, like, when they show that movie in Paris, what do they put in the subtitles? Non, juif. I mean, it's not funny in French, So puns are the most untranslatable kind of thing in artistry or in humor. And so the yarad and then the yeradam, you wouldn't get it unless, you all go out and take Hebrew. And then the captain of the ship comes to him and says to him, what's with you, sleeper? And he calls him a sleeper, and it's with the word nirdam, which is you put a nun, an n at the beginning of a word, and it makes it the passive. So you're someone who has fallen asleep. He says, what's with you, nirdam? And then at the end, the sailors throw him in the water. And what do they do to get God to forgive them? They vow vows, which in Hebrew is not nidarim, like kol nidre, and it's nidarim, nirdam, within a couple lines of each other. And then he keeps describing everything as gadol, big. It's a big fish and a big storm and a big anger and a big sea. And the word gadol comes up like 14 times. Trust me, I counted 14 times in the book of Jonah. And you go, now, how can that be? That such a great author as this, who obviously has such great control of language, the only word he can think of is gadol for big. He couldn't thought, there's big, there's great, there's giant, there's tremendous. All he does, everything's gadol, gadol, gadol. But then he's inside the fish, and God tells the fish to vomit Jonah. It says, God said, Vayomer, I don't know how God said, la dog, to the fish, la dog, which is gadol, backwards. And we know that they do that because you saw other places where they do it. And one that's kind of a favorite for me, all the sailors say, look, God, don't count it against us that we're throwing him in the water. I mean, he asked us to do it. We're doing your will here. So don't count us against us, innocent blood. And the way you say innocent blood in Hebrew is dam naki, which is literally clean blood, naki. But they say it. Now, the way you spell naki in Hebrew, now stay with me here, even if you don't know Hebrew, it just got 3 letters, nun, kuf, yud. Naki is clean, innocent blood. Except in the book of Jonah, it is misspelled. It is nun, kuf, yud, aleph. It adds an extra silent letter at the end. Now, I am quite sure that the person who wrote the book of Jonah knew how to spell in Hebrew, especially a common word like that. So what's the Aleph doing there? And in fact, if you look in the Leningrad Codex, in the oldest manuscripts, it says in the notes that the medieval scribes put in the side, Yeter Aleph, extraneous Aleph. They didn't know what it was doing there either. But if you do that, if you make it that way, Naki, Kuf Yud Aleph, that is a word for vomit in Hebrew. And then the fish vomits him with that same word at the end of that story. And in case we're we're not done yet. At the end, I said there's this gourd growing over him. The gourd in Hebrew is a kikayon. There's no such word in Hebrew as kikayon in the Bible. It is apparently an Akkadian word, kukoyanu, which meant a particular kind of plant. And Akkadian is the language that they spoke in Assyria, and it is a Semitic language related to Hebrew. So this word occurs only in the book of Jonah here and nowhere else, this word for a gourd. But listen to the sound of it, right? Ki means to vomit. It's a kikayon. It sounds like nothing so much as the vomiting of Jonah, the kikayon. Cool, huh? These authors were good. You know? That's how you get into the Bible. You have to be very, very good, writer to get into the Bible. So there are all these puns through here, and you say, okay, do the puns prove anything in the story? Do you have anything to do with anything that happens? Is there a lesson to be learned? So a rabbi can get a good sermon out of it, or is it just an artist having fun with language, which would be good enough, or an artist enjoying his artistry, which would be good enough? But no, in fact, the whole book rides on one of the puns. Jonah walks through the city and he says 40 more days and Nineveh is overturned. And the word he uses there is the Hebrew nehepachet. That root in Hebrew has two different meanings. It can either mean, and you can check this out, you look it up in the concordance, half the time it means destruction, like it means a city is overturned, Or the other half of the time it means to have a change of heart. Like when Pharaoh says to Moses after a couple of the plagues, all right, I'll let your people go. But then the plague goes away, and then it says, Vayehafech, the heart of Pharaoh, his heart flipped over. Half the time it means to have a change of heart, half the time it means to be destroyed. So when Jonah goes through the city and he says 40 more days and Nineveh is overthrown, he's going to be right either way. It's one of those Delphic oracles that either way is going to be true. And Jonah himself doesn't get it. He doesn't have to get it. His job is to deliver a message. And no matter how hard he tried for the first half of the book to get out of it, he wasn't in charge of deciding that. And so it shows, profoundly that the prophet is just a tool of God, and the prophet doesn't have to get his or her own prophecy. I think that's pretty good. And it's funny. So the humor serves a purpose, and it teaches this great lesson. We'll come back to that in a moment. Now, you're probably saying to yourselves, self, what does this have to do with the book of Joel, a book of the Bible that I didn't even realize was there, let alone ever having read? Joel is maybe the least read book in the Bible. I know there are others that can vie for that honor, but many people say, well, have you read the book of Joel? And they won't believe you that there is a book called Joel in the Bible, but there is. And the book of Joel is very unusual because it's all full of quotations. Almost everything Joel says through the whole book is about the same length as Jonah, by the way, about 3.5, 4 pages. And almost every line he says is a verse that occurs in some other book of the Bible as well. Okay? I'll give you a few examples, but I've got a million of them. Okay? He says, the grain and the wine and the oil. The prophet Hosea had said, the grain and the wine and the oil. He says, before the coming of the big and fearful day of the Lord. Prophet Malachi says, before the coming of the big and fearful day of the Lord. He says, the day of the Lord is close. The prophets Isaiah, Obadiah, and Zephaniah all used the line, the day of the Lord is close. He says, a day of cloud and thick darkness. The prophet Zephaniah said, a day of cloud and thick darkness. He says, the mountains will drip new wine. The prophet Amos said, the mountains will drip new wine. He says, the Lord will roar from Zion, and from Jerusalem will set his voice. That's the famous first verse of the book of Amos. The Lord will roar from Zion, and Jerusalem will set his voice. And it's also in Jeremiah. So you go, what the heck is going on? Should we just say this is the least original biblical author of them all? Or is he doing something here? The traditional read by scholars is they refer to Joel as the learned prophet. So he's learned because he knows what all the other prophets said, and he's using them in his own work. Today we would say plagiarism, you know. but don't give up quite yet, because he also manipulates these when he cites them. So in Ezekiel, it says, this land that was desolate has become like a Garden of Eden. Joel says, like a Garden of Eden is the earth before him, and after him a desolation. So he's flipped the original source around and made it mean just the opposite. In Jeremiah and in Isaiah, it says when people were supposed to be mourning, then they did not tear their clothes. Joel says, tear your hearts, not your clothes. And the best one of all, Joel is the prophet who says, beat your plowshares into swords and your pruning hooks to spears. He flips one of the most famous lines in the Bible and makes it backwards. Now, what is the author of this book up to? There are two strange things about the book. One is all those quotations, and the other is the second chapter, which is all about locusts. It's about this plague of locusts, but sometimes it compares the locusts to an army, like a human army, and he goes back and forth, so half the time you don't know whether he means the metaphor locusts, or he means an actual army, or does he mean a real army, or just the locust as a symbol. And trust me, you read it through, you won't be able to tell. He's doing something strange with this metaphor of the locusts, and you never find out why, and then the rest of the book goes back to being about these quotations again. So one review by one Bible scholar of, he wrote a book called Joel's Use of Scripture and the Scripture's Use of Joel. And he said, the rather dense cluster of verbal and thematic parallels in the book of Joel to other parts of the Hebrew Bible has given rise to much speculation about their role in the message of the book, parentheses, which is not self-evident. Nobody knows what this book's message is. Or the scholar Peter Craigie wrote, he is unknown outside of the book, and virtually nothing of biographical interest remains in the book. The book of Joel gives no clear indication of its date. It concerns the ministry of a virtually unknown prophet who functioned in an unknown century. Well, that helps a lot when you're a scholar. That's we're clear. Have we cleared that all up for everybody now? And one of my favorites is James Crenshaw, who's a very fine scholar, especially of wisdom literature as well. And his comment was, I have learned more than most people care to know about locusts. That was the comment after he wrote a commentary on Joel. But I've given you examples of him using lines from almost every prophet. And I can tell you, he quotes every pre-exilic prophet and none of the post-exilic prophets. So you can help date him because he's only to the time that the Babylonians, or so it seems, or else he just really hated post-exilic prophets. He thought, gee, they don't write like the good old days. And but he quotes the verse from Exodus 34, the line that God says to Moses on Mount Sinai, God, merciful and gracious, long for kindness, he says, and cleansing. He misquotes it exactly the way Jonah did. It's written that way only in Jonah and in Joel. Now you might say, well, okay, but there might be some reason why two prophets would both misquote the most famous verse they knew in the Bible. Maybe, except he does one other thing that's also in the book of Jonah. He refers to shedding innocent blood, and he misspells the word for innocent, naki, with the extra aleph again. He makes the same misspelling. That can't be chance. So what should we make of all that? Well, you know me, some of you who know how I am about authorship on the Bible. To me, it means that in all likelihood, the book of Jonah and the book of Joel were written by the same author, or at least two authors who are acquainted with each other or with each other's work. I like it to be one author. I like that better. But then you say, but why would they do that? Why would some biblical author or authors do a thing like that? Is it to mock the other prophets? Are they doing it just for fun? Is it just to express their skill and their erudition? Is it disrespectful? And I can think of an analogy of something where pious people do something humorous with a sacred text, and it's not disrespectful. And I'll bet most of you have never come across this. Those who have studied the Talmud, you know, there's all these volumes, and each one on a different subject and all. And there are two volumes that are called, a volume is a masechet. In English, we call it a tractate. In Hebrew, masechet. There are two masechtot, Purim. One is called Masechet Purim, Tractate Purim, and the other is called Masechet Haman, Tractate Haman. Now, believe me, there aren't really any volumes of the Talmud called Tractate Purim and Tractate Haman. We don't study Haman in yeshivas, you know? But these are like full volumes, like a whole volume, and written the same way with the main text in the middle and all the commentaries and the Rashi and the medievals all around it. And they get into the same complex kinds of questions. Like, you know, there's in the Talmud, there's the thing, if you're cooking meat and a little piece of pork drops into your pot where you're cooking your stew, does that render the whole stew unkosher or not? And the answer is, it's batel b'shishim. It is nullified if it's less than 1/60th of the sum total of the stew. So in this Tractate Haman, they ask the question, a piece of Haman drops into your pot, is it batel b'shishim or not, or does it ruin the whole stew? So on the one hand, they're clearly having fun with this. And after all, it's Purim, the holiday where you're supposed to have fun, where it's okay to get drunk. All of that about Purim. There's this custom, you know, on Purim, it says you're supposed to drink until you don't know the difference between Mordecai and Haman. I'm more Haredi about these things. And my view is you have to get drunk enough that you can't tell the difference between Mordecai and Esther. So that's the contemporary. So is it disrespectful of these to do it? The guys who wrote these Masechtot, these were Orthodox yeshiva students. Nobody but a learned yeshiva student could possibly have constructed the artistry of these two volumes. They're doing it for the sheer joy of it. They love the text, and out of love, they do this fun with it. It's like, and you want to parallel in our own culture, if you know the play of Tom Stoppard's Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead, where he's playing off Hamlet, and it's hilarious and it's comic genius. It was the first of Tom Stoppard's plays that I ever saw, and I thought, who is this guy? It's phenomenal what he created in this work, but he wasn't disrespectful to Shakespeare. He was creating something phenomenal out of the material of Shakespeare. And I think that might be what was happening with whoever wrote Jonah and Joel. These things didn't happen, but they're magnificent works in the Bible that use humor, and they use it in a way that's going to make an important religious method. I would call it a message. I would call it reverent humor, if you can live with that. It's like my great teacher, Yochanan Mufs of blessed memory, used to say to the class, I don't joke lightly. And it seems to me the author of Jonah and Joel didn't joke lightly. And so, at least two of the Bible's most profound messages are conveyed here in our most humorous books, our two most humorous books in the Bible. And what are those two messages? One, humans can avert catastrophic consequences by changing their ways, by truly atoning and changing our ways. That's the message in Jonah. And when do we read Jonah? On Yom Kippur, after all, which is about that. We learn, and the other is we should care about foreigners as well as ourselves. In Jonah, it's the sailors and the people of Nineveh who are treated with sympathy, and they're foreigners. So, if you ask why I would lecture on humor during this horrible, catastrophic time, there's your answer. Okay, everybody, we're done. I have an easy audience over here.
You want to take questions?
Only if they're funny.
Anybody have any funny questions?
See, now I shouldn't do that. That's, you know.
I'll just sit in the dark.
The old Jewish mother joke, yeah. I don't believe I've told any Jewish mother jokes yet. Or have I?
Can't think of any.
Did I do the one about the Freudian slip?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm not sure.
These two Jewish psychoanalysts, I realize Jewish psychoanalyst is redundant. These two Jewish psychoanalysts are having lunch, and one of them said, you know, I made the weirdest Freudian slip last night. I was having dinner with my mother, and I meant to say, pass the potatoes, please. And I said, thanks for ruining my life. That's my Jewish mother joke. Now let's hope that 1,000 years from now, they just don't see any humor in that at all.
Nice.
Are we good here? Should we just go home? There's a question there.
Oh, is that a question, Andy? Yeah. Okay. Hold on. I will unmute you. Hold on 1 second. Okay. I think you should be able to unmute yourself. Yep.
Thank you very much. And Professor Friedman, very enjoyable as always. I'd like to pose a question about your assertion that puns aren't harmful, that they're the kind of humor that doesn't cause pain. Perhaps they are hurtful if puns are an attempt to demonstrate the superior intellect or cleverness of the author of the puns, you know, to say to the person who is listening to them, you know, don't you get it? Or look how much smarter I am than you. So is it a pun in a way is a kind of a put down to the person who doesn't get it, and also an affirmation to the colleague who, you and I are on the same level. You got this. So my challenge is really just your assertion that puns aren't harmful. I think sometimes they can be.
Look, I absolutely take your point. I think you're right. Yeah, and I would gladly modify it in future talks. Because I mean, I have thought that there are some elements of punning, right, that we could make the case that they do that. I'll give a couple examples. One is what you're describing is there's some jokes where the joke is on the listener, and there's some jokes where the Rodney Dangerfield jokes where you put the joke, the person telling the joke puts the joke on himself, and both work, and those are two different kinds of humor. And what you're describing is more that first kind where the joke is on the hearer. There's also, I think, an element of punning. I didn't think of this. Some people have said to me that they think the thing about a pun that works is that it tears apart our most precious means of communication and expressing thoughts, which is words and language. And humans, we express our thoughts in language. Once you do learn to speak, you can't think not in words, I'm told by people who do this cognitive stuff, which I don't. And some of the case that was made, like I've heard the case made for people who do developmental stuff, which is what my wife does, is that late speakers are more likely on average to be conceptual thinkers. Now, I don't know how anybody would do the test to prove that, because you have to accept the parents' view of how old their kid was when he started talking, and we all know that our kids started talking at 2 months, I put this to a test just so you understand. This is an informal, anecdotal test that I just talked to all the people who I knew, friends and all, who I thought were conceptual thinkers, and I asked them, and it's true that disproportionately they said yes, they were late talkers. And there's that famous thing that Einstein was 3.5, 4 or something before he could talk, but his mind was already working, but he wasn't bound by language the way the rest of us are. And maybe that's why he could make a leap to seeing things that others couldn't, or else everything I just told you is complete bullshit and it's an unproven hypothesis. But that's why punning, because it breaks that, becomes a threatening thing. And it is fearful. And if you don't think that's true, then you be like I am and like my friend Jake is. We're both obnoxious people like us. People who are really into punning. So when you're talking and you mistakenly open the door to them, It gives them a chance, because you say, well, Shirley, I won't. They go, oh, don't call me Shirley. And they do that one. And you say, oh, yeah, well, that sounds fishy. And say, did you say it on purpose? But they interrupt you and they break your chain of thought. My wife hates this when I do that to her. I hate it when Jake does it to me, and I like puns. Using puns then can break our most precious means of thinking and communication. So that would also be your point, I think, and it would reinforce it.
Okay, thank you.
Dan?
Is there any other questions? I can't see the people, so can you tell me who?
Elena?
Elaine, okay. Ellen or wait, hold on.
That person should be unmuted.
Well, they're not. I don't think they are. Hold on.
There.
Okay.
You have a question? No? Okay. Then we're all good. Everybody, please stay well, stay safe. Wait.
I wanted to ask a question.
Oh, go ahead.
You unmuted me, and there's another Ellen in the group. The one that she has a pink shirt.
I tried to unmute, but
I'm looking for a little rectangle that doesn't have that mute symbol on it, so I'd know.
I see that. Oops, sorry. I'm having a little trouble with my computer, which is. Okay, Ellen, can you try to unmute yourself?
I'm unmuted now.
Oh, great.
Okay, just a couple comments. One is, I think there's two different groups of people. There's people who like puns, and there's a lot of people who don't. So I think you have to be in one. You're either in one of those two camps. And I'm like you, Dr. Friedman. I like puns. So anyway, my other comment was on terms of tragedy. Arthur Miller is good for tragedy, but I don't think he's near as good as Eugene O'Neill. And unless you've seen The Iceman Cometh or Long Day's Journey into Night, which I think are just absolutely unsurpassed for American tragedy, they're pretty close to Shakespeare for tragedy.
Well, you're embarrassing me there because I've never been able to get into Eugene O'Neill, and after what's wrong with me? I claim to be like an intellectual, and I love theater and all that.
Well, he is hard to get into, but and probably because he had so much tragedy in his life, which Shakespeare never had it near the tragedy. And a lot of Eugene O'Neill's plays are really more autobiographical.
Wow.
But he's very much tragedy.
Well, you may force me here to give it another chance. I'm an honest guy.
Yeah, he's much deeper tragedy than Arthur Miller's lightweight in comparison to Eugene O'Neill.
Okay, that helps, and I wouldn't fight with them about that. Yeah,
I think he's a much greater tragedian. I'm not sure what the word would be.
Yeah. Okay.
All right.
I know of a couple of scholars of American literature who say it's impossible in American culture to write a true tragedy because our culture isn't tragic, but I won't go there, and especially if you're right about O'Neill, because you only need one exception to prove that wrong. So, yeah.
All right. Well, next week's lecture is Do you believe in magic? So that sounds like.
I'll have John Sebastian and the Love and Spoonful here as guest lecturers with me. Yeah. So
sounds like they're already there.
Okay. Goodbye.
All right. Thank you.
Healthy.